the previous one and quickly update it.
Which usually introduce kind of, often I forget something, so maybe you should double check me after. That's the weird part, which is the last version or lesson or how less it is. You know, last time
That's good.
I installed PowerPoint, the last version some time ago. It kind of changed all the configuration so that every LibreOffice or OpenOffice files are not, by default you click on it and it opens the PowerPoint and once it converts it every time.
Let's see what this USB works. Yeah, I know.
Oh, that's 15.
Let's see what happens if I just plug that in. This is not a USB stick. Why did I do that? Nothing. Some sort of nice keyboard.
So do we have Brian here, or is
Brian is remote. I've sorted out his booking for Meet Echo, so that's all fine. And he's already on Meet Echo. So.
Cool.
Yeah, this USB thing just doesn't work.
Okay, here it is. Hopefully with no.
It's a Logitech USB receiver. Oh, perhaps that comes in as a separate keyboard. I have no idea how to change keyboards. That does nothing.
It's getting there.
And I don't want to do it in Chrome.
Good afternoon. This is the DTN Working Group meeting.
Let's see. Is that even doing what? What is that doing? This is silly idea. Maybe on my screens.
So let's start while my friend Rick is taking care of the screen thing. So again, this is the DTN Working Group. Slides are on the data tracker. So this meeting is under Note Well, so everything you say or you write is under the Note Well. Please see the various documents related to this. Cool. Proposed agenda. Almost done the first point. Second is Scott for BPBIS, then Ed for BPSec, Brian remotely for TCP CL v4, and then Ed again for the asynchronous management architecture and protocol, and then last on a heterogeneous addressing. John is presenting, right?
John is presenting.
So again, the main objective or the first priority of the working group is getting the BPBIS stable and then pushing forward. So everything depends on it would be in good shape for progressing the rest. Ed, you would do as usual your great notes. Thank you very much. However, Ed is presenting, so it would be good if we have another secretary, at least for to take notes while Ed is presenting. Any volunteer? Once.
Thank you, John.
Okay, and last slide is the milestones review. We have a lot of things to do. But they all depends on BPBIS, so I think we should have Scott to provide us the latest update, I guess, from the interim meeting, right?
It's completely useless. The batteries are dead.
Okay, so I've got, I think, just 3 or 4 slides here. And just a quick recap of the latest changes to the BPBIS specification. Next slide. We had an interim meeting by conference call in September. And these are the items that came out of that meeting as I remember them. That this is the consensus of the meeting, is that the remaining things to do on the spec were there was a request to add a note that the flexibility in encoding that the specification contemplates is not to be interpreted as encouraging galloping complexity in adding fancy new features to the specification. There was a proposal to add a CBOR data definition language expression of the specification in an appendix. There was a decision to omit, to revise the way CBOR representation was expressed in the specification, and specifically removing the additional information and details, and letting the details of the CBOR representations be determined by the implementations, because the implementations should be able to decode properly whichever, regardless of like leading zeros or whatever were inserted by the encoding library, and also to use the CBOR Boolean type rather than unsigned integer for Boolean values. We, I believe, reached an agreement to remove what was termed the rerouting service from custody transfer. So now custody transfer is quite explicitly defined in the specification as a timeout-driven retransmission mechanism with some additional signaling to assist in the computation of the timeout intervals, and also to inform the current custodian when there's some reason that the forwarding that ought to be done by the receiving node can't be done, and that's going back to the original set of custody transfer reason codes. Oh, and then going along with that, the idea of replacing essentially the rerouting service with an additional status flag saying the node refused custody of bundle. As it turns out, as I was going through the text, it was easier to do that, and made more sense to do that in my mind in the first flag in the status reports rather than in the that's an additional status flag, but it comes to the same thing. And next slide. I think the one other thing that that I found as I was going through it was,
And that works.
oh, okay. Oh, okay. Oh, how nice. I found that I had encoded a CBOR object called fragment ID, combining a couple of things that occurred frequently in the specification as a structure, and had written that up incorrectly as the fragment offset and the original payload length, when it ought to have been the fragment offset and the fragment length that defines the fragment. Okay, next slide.
You can do it on there.
Oh, I can do it on here. Oh, that's so cool. Okay, so the revised specification was posted on the 29th of October. And as of the time I put these slides together, the comments that I had gotten were these comments from Carlo Caini at University of Bologna. He pointed out an error in, oops. Huh.
I think it's looped. Try that.
Ah, there we go. Okay. There it is, better. Okay. That in 422, the definition of the primary bundle block, the payload length is part of the ID of the fragment, and that there's some informative text there that needs to be fixed. He suggested that the list of major modifications should include moving quality of service to an extension block, which seems reasonable. I mean, it is a major change. He suggested that when we're talking about BPSec in this document, that we should just talk about BPSec rather than refer to the specific BPSec blocks, the bib and BCB. And a topic that he brought up in his comments, but didn't think that it was something that we should try to wrestle with here, was rethinking the accuracy of clocks and whether there was more than a two-valued logic, that the clocks are accurate or not, and that the bundle age block was either needed or wasn't, and there might be some, the clock might be semi-accurate, and there may be some gradations in there. I think that's opening a can of worms that we could spend years on. So I would propose we acknowledge that question has been asked and move on. And that's all of my slides. Are there any questions or comments on the specification? I should point out, I've also gotten some more comments, mostly editorial, from Kevin, and I haven't gotten anybody else's comments. If there are some, please send them on.
Can I add at this point, this document is heading fast towards last call, so we need comments now to make sure that we are ready for last call on this, because this is a charter item and is an integral part of the working group's work. So if you haven't read it, please read it and then get some good comments out, even if they're just editorial nits. Or
even if it's just, it's okay. I mean, a comment that says it's okay as it is, that's fine. It's good to have something.
Yeah, there's some power spikes.
A little. It didn't merit a comment that I gave you, but I'll just throw it out there for people to pay.
Can you state your name, please?
Kevin Fallon, Felly Networks. The section that describes deferred, I think it's custody deferred or something like that. Is the
delegated.
Delegated, yeah. That one.
Yeah.
Relative to the history of things, it seems like that was somewhat newer.
It is, yeah,
and so
definitely.
I might suggest people that are going to go read it, do read that part, because it's different than some stuff that had been there before. It gave me a little bit of concern, but I didn't actually formulate something useful to say just yet.
That's a good idea, because that is new. It is it's something that Keith Scott suggested, I think at the Berlin meetings, and the intent there is, since custodial retransmission depends on expiration of a timeout, to the extent that the timeout expiration interval can be, the accuracy of that interval can be improved, the efficiency of the retransmission mechanism should be improved. So the intent of that delegation message is to provide additional information to the current custodian about future transmission that the custodian can use in conjunction with other information to figure out a timeout interval.
The nature of my concern, which again, I didn't think about it hard enough to formulate the comment, was you get in a situation where your bundle that requests custody goes through a number of nodes and they all wind up generating something of this nature. I didn't know.
And none of them take custody.
Yeah. And so that you wind up with this amplification problem of an unbounded amount. But I didn't know if that really happens. So that was, I guess.
Nobody's tried it yet, so there's the way to know. Good point, though. Anything else? And this may be a really quick presentation. You may be able to move on to the next agenda item.
Go ahead.
What I was going to add as a sort of follow-up question to the room, and then we'll take it to the list, is: do we think this draft is ready for last call? Does anyone believe there are any major showstoppers in here? Does anyone think they haven't looked hard enough yet? Okay, so I see one hand for someone who wants to do a proper review.
Well,
I should look forward to that, Ronald.
Well, during the working group last call, that's the time to review the document. I think what we're trying to get here is any showstoppers or anything big that is remains to be discussed, or are we stable as a spec? And then working group last call is the time to do a detailed review and send comments. It's not yet done for comments. It's just that, are we stable enough? Because the previous discussion brought additional changes, but it seems now we're pretty stable. We haven't seen, so here's the chance to say, no, there's something broken still and we need to fix it. And if not, then maybe that's the right time to do working group last call. So the co-chairs try to get the feeling of the room or the working group in about, you know, all right, is this document ready for working group last call?
Do you want a hum? Show of hands? Let's do a hum. So the hum is, if you think this document is ready for last call, hum now. Okay.
The Windows version.
If you do not think this document is ready for last call, hum now. Well, okay. Obviously, we'll take the question to the list, but that sounds pretty positive for last call to me.
Great. That'd be great.
Who's next? Oh, I have an agenda here somewhere.
Too many questions.
Sorry.
It was Ed, but
I think it's Ed next, isn't it? Which is...
yes, BPSec.
There's a flicker there. It should go left and right on the red buttons.
Okay. Hi, my name is Ed Brain, and I'm going to talk about updates to Bundle Protocol Security, BPSec, updates from the last IETF. So we did not have many updates from last IETF. There was some editorial cleanup, particularly around the idea of multi-target blocks. For those who are familiar, BPSec defines two kinds of extension blocks for security: an integrity block and a confidentiality block. Originally in the spec, there was a one-to-one notion between blocks and the blocks that they target, the blocks that they provide integrity or confidentiality for. At the last IETF, we added the concept of multiple targets for a security block to avoid the redundant collection of key information and other information. And with multi-target blocks, if the security source and the operation and the key information is all the same, then you can have a list of targets and not repeat all of that other key information coming forward, which was somewhat of a compromise between a one-to-one between security blocks and having all blocks have all multiplicity across all security sources. So we cleaned up some of that some of that verbiage. And then the other was, in the document, we actually had it listed erroneously as informational. We did not want this to be informational, and so we moved the document type to a standards track document. Finally, 2 IETFs ago, we removed the concept of a third security block, which was a cryptographic message syntax block, and that was something that we had agreed on in this room, well, in this working group. And but we decided that cryptographic messaging syntax may be useful, and one of the things that we would want to do is allow some additional specs, perhaps at a later time, to come in and define their own security blocks, but to do so in a way that doesn't perturb BPSec. We wanted to add some rules and guidance on how to define other security blocks and stay conformant with BPSec. And then sort of lastly, really, we aren't tracking any significant items of change for BPSec other than we will track BPBiz, and if there are any changes in BPBiz that affect BPSec, obviously we'll react to those. So in particular, the remainder of this presentation goes over the guidance that we provided if you're going to define other security blocks in a different document. And this is the guidance provided by BPSec. For the authors of those other standards. And there are roughly, I think, 6 of them. And some of these should be sort of non-controversial, right? If you're defining another security spec, you really can't override the identifiers that have been defined here. You can't say, well, I want a bib, and it will work differently than your bib, and so I'm going to override the block type codes, for example. Additionally, you must address how your OSB will interact with the BPSec blocks. What does that mean? In the BPSec specification, we took great care in understanding the process order of what blocks could target other blocks, and that processing order must also be addressed in any new specification. Particularly, can the new block be the target of a BIB or a BCB, or can it itself target BIBs and BCBs? If the OSB can be the target of a BIB or a BCB, it requires canonicalization because you have to create, obviously, a stream for this to feed it into a cipher suite. If you do not want to use the standard extension block canonicalization algorithm provided in BPSec, you then have to define your own. And then if such a canonicalization algorithm is provided, it has to be used always and not conditionally based on some other state. We must maintain a deterministic processing order that's compatible with the BPSec processing order. This came out of some of the original understanding of BSP and SBSP, where there were cases where the processing order of whether you would choose to evaluate an integrity block or a confidentiality block could be reversed based on order in the bundle or fragmentation or other kinds of issues. And one of the things that BPSec wanted to get away from was obviously any kind of ambiguity there. So BPSec defines a deterministic processing order, and any OSB must fit itself within that deterministic processing order. A general catch-all statement that says you really can't change any of the security processing requirements in BPSec. And then also as guidance, any other security block must address fragmentation. And this was a significant cause of headaches when we worked through first SBSP and then BPSec as we worked through several of the fragmentation cases. In particular, how do you process bundles that represent fragments? How do you handle an OSB in a bundle that may no longer, due to fragmentation, contain its security target? Or whether you can even add an OSB to a bundle that is a security, or that is a bundle. So all of these cases are cases that have been handled in the BPSec document itself, and they also have to be addressed in any other kind of security specification that comes forward. So by adding these 6 or 7 items of considerations and requirements for other security blocks to be considered compliant with BPSec, I think we've sort of handled the case of if somebody at a later time feels very strongly about adding the cryptographic message syntax as a capability into a bundle, we have a framework where they can do that that doesn't change this specification and also gives the rules and requirements for making sure that it doesn't break other deployments of BPSec that perhaps don't always use or process CMS blocks. And that's about it. There were a couple other small changes, nits and editorial. There were some open questions from the last IETF. Should BPSec provide its own encoding? This was at a time before we had said that BPBIS would use the CBOR encoding. So I think the answer to that is no, BPSec should not provide its own encoding. It should follow the BPBIS encoding. Does BPSec really need blocks transmitted in a particular order? No, it does not need blocks transmitted in a particular order. So the claim is that with addressing the removal of CMS blocks, I think that we've covered all of the open issues associated with BPSec. In the last IETF, we added the security policy and cipher suite authorship considerations. We've added the multi-target blocks to reduce any duplicity in the key information. And we've created the extensibility mechanism if someone wants to add additional security blocks on their own. And other than making sure that we track BPBIS, if there are any changes there, I think we're pretty close to done on this one. So that's what I have. Unless there are, that's all I have on BPSec, unless there are questions. And then
I have a question, Ed, and it's a sort of a question to the room as well. With the OSB conformance section, you have IANA requests for type code assignments, and quickly looking over my shoulder at the document, you ask IANA to reserve values in there.
we do.
Now that means reserved for the IETF to assign. Where are you suggesting that we reserve a different set of numbers within the IANA assigned numbers for third-party public It's what my question, I suppose, is what numbers are these OSBs going to use, and who defines whether they clash or not? Who's going to? Are you telling them to go to IANA for the registration?
So there are two questions. The first is, how do you identify a different kind of security block? And so much like the BIB and the BCB, a security block is an extension block in the bundle protocol, and it's identified by its block type code.
Mm-hmm.
So just as BIB and BCB would have their own assigned block codes, block type code, any other security block written by any other participant would need to go and register a new block type code. And we do not see that, I see no usefulness in pre-reserving a set of codes for potential other security blocks, because there may be zero or there may be one. I don't know how many there would be.
Okay.
But I think the process of registering another OSB would be the same as anyone who would generate another extension block type. Then the other observation around BPSec was that there are 3 drafts. I think at this point they're expired, but their information is not stale. They just need to be re-upped. There is a Suite B cipher suite and profile for BPSec that needs to be updated, and we're trying to target getting that done by the next IETF to bring them into conformance with BPSec and BPBiz. And then lastly, there is a security best practices document where we are attempting to capture common security use cases and discuss how you could achieve those use cases with combinations of BP, bundle and bundle encapsulation, BPSec, and other standards that are related. The concept being back from the beginning when we generated BPSec was to try and separate out the protocol from the policy to its application for security services. So a question that I have is, I see these kinds of standards as nice to haves in general, but I don't see them as required to standardizing the BPSec itself. So I guess my question to myself or to the room would be, do we think that BPSec has dependencies on these or other standards, or do we think the only dependency on BPSec is BPBiz?
I have my own view as well.
John Dowdle, Airbus. Is it worth just republishing these as informational, as examples of this is how you can do it?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think they should. I don't think they should fall off the edge. And I think they are useful, but they are useful for people who want to deploy BPSec in certain areas. But I don't think they should hold up, for example, the standardization of BPSec itself.
No, I think I'd be inclined to agree with that.
One answer to the question is, what are the documents necessary for an implementer to actually implement this stuff, right? So if those documents are not necessary, then they're not necessary.
Yep. Okay. Oh, that is all that I have for BPSec.
Quick remark. When you, and that applies to everybody, but when you request IANA, if you request a new registry, then you can define, what the registry look like and all the numbers you want to pre-assign. But when it's an existing registry and you want to add values, then usually we don't put the values because that's IANA to actually define the values.
Oh, right.
So detail, but
Okay. No, I'll if
put
that
like
gets captured in the notes, I'll take them.
to be done or something, and then IANA will actually allocate the actual values, because
Okay. No,
there are
that's
multiple streams coming, so they don't unless you have a specific reason for a specific number because it's a bit pattern or something, then you can ask a specific. But
No, for the block type code's not.
Yeah,
So
so-
I'll make that change. Cool. Thank you.
So next up we have Brian Sipos. If he's remoting in, so I hope you can hear us, Brian. If somebody's on Jabber while I try and find his slides. Which one is his? I don't have his slides. They're his own slides. I'll have to download them. Sorry. Sorry, I'll try and work out how to make Meet Echo work. Right.
Remember, there was kind of something
There's a
that
magic thing we have to press.
just to mute the attendee. Okay. Okay, we need to push on the red button. Nuclear explosion.
Yeah.
Woo! Ask him to talk.
Brian, can you try talking and we'll see if you're coming through? Oh, what do I do? I now have to try pressing it again.
Great.
We've got you, Brian.
Perfect. Wonderful. Okay. So the presentation is short and hopefully reflects that the protocol is now also short and simple. So first slide, please. Or next, I should say. This presentation is just reviewing some of the changes since last interim IETF. And we can go to the next slide and discuss some basics on the protocol. These next two slides, I think, are carryovers from earlier presentations, but they just are reiterating the background for this revised TCP/CL, really just to address some very specific issues that came up in the earlier version. And point number 3 is what was discussed in the last interim IETF, which was to simplify the protocol itself and simply remove variability in sequencing options from TCP/CL, because the only reason why there was variability was for some amount of backwards compatibility with earlier unreleased versions. So next slide, please. And the major goal of the change is to not change the scope or workflow of the transfer protocol. It's intended to be very simple and straightforward, not have a lot of choices to it, and get bundles from one end of the connection to the other end of the connection. This means that there is a lot of reuse of existing type codes and reason codes. There are some additional type codes and reason codes added to handle specifically